Hello and welcome to Let's Talk podcast which enriches life, or I would say enriching life through a podcast. Let's get started with a story. Once upon a time, there was a village that was famous for its silk industry. The silk weavers of the village has been producing a high quality silk for generations, and their products were in demand all over the region. One day, a wealthy merchant from a nearby city came to a village to buy silk for his business. He was known to be a tough negotiator and had the reputation of getting the best deal possible. The merchant went to the first silk weaver and he asked the price, or I would say he asked the price for the silk. The weaver, eager to make a sale, quoted a price that was much lower than what he usually charged. The merchant sensed that the weaver was desperate to sell his silk, so he offered even a lower price. The weaver, hoping to close the deal, agreed to the merchant's price. The merchant then went to another silk weaver and repeated the same process, offering lower price than what the weaver asked for. However, this time the weaver refused to budge on his price. He explained to the merchant that he has been making high quality silk for years and his price is fair and reasonable. The merchant was impressed by Weaver's confidence and knowledge about his product. He continues to visit each silk weaver in the village, but he found that only few were willing to negotiate with him. The one who stood firm on the price, who has confidence about the product and knew the true value of the commodity. Eventually, merchant realized that he has been too much focused on lowering the price and overlooked the importance of the quality. He went back to the weavers who had refused to negotiate and bought their silk at their asking price. Not only that, he also recommended the weavers to his business associates. The weavers who stood firm on their price not only gain new customer, but they also show value of their product and the importance of standing by it. The lesson from the story is that negotiating skills are important, but it's equally important to know the true value of your product, the service, and confidence in it. Don't be afraid to stand firm on your price when you know it's fair and reasonable. A good negotiator will recognize the value of the product and willing to pay what it's worth. So now, if you're thinking what would be the topic for today's discussion, yes, it's negotiating skills. And today, we have a special guest here. She is the CEO and founder of the 30K program, which empowers women to get a high paying jobs efficiently and confidently. She has trained hundreds of hiring managers and thousands of professionals she has interviewed as well. So, Mia Smithson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. So, the first question which I would like to ask, I was pretty intrigued about when I was researching about you. How exactly you transition, and it's a pretty mouthful word, so I'll take a step by step. Transition from a neuropsychopharmacology to a technical recruiting. This is a most interesting transition I have seen so far.
It's definitely not the common path.
Yes.
So I come from a family of doctors, right? My grandfather's a brain surgeon, my dad a rehabilitation doctor. So it was just a given that I would pursue something within the medical field. And so I got accepted into one of the top neuropsychopharmacology doctoral programs. And I moved across the country to Chicago, and my parents were thrilled, and I was excited. And here's the thing. During the pre-doctoral training, I started working as a technical recruiter. And I was working for a company where I was able to recruit for some of the top companies within tech, right? So I recruited for companies like Google and Microsoft and Salesforce, and I fell in love with it, right? So essentially, I was working as a technical recruiter while doing the training for neuropsychopharmacology, and I was noticing that I was enjoying more what I was doing for my job than what I was learning in school, right? And so um, it got to the point where I had to make a decision. And by the time I made the decision, I had grown my technical recruiting skills to the point of where I was ranked within the top 15% of the 400 recruiters in that company. And they had recruiters in like 83 countries, right? So it was really competitive. And I had to make a decision, and I dropped out of the doctoral program and then pursued recruiting full fledged. And I'm really grateful that I did, because right after I dropped out of that doctoral program, I started working at a company that enabled me to grow my skills even further, and then eventually get into a global director of talent management role, overseeing hiring and leadership development for 800 people in 7 countries. So you never really know how the building blocks of your career will like morph together. But I think as long as you're listening to that still small voice in your gut, then you won't go astray, and you'll go in the direction that you feel called to go. So
Yeah, that's fascinating because we seldomly see that people go out of their career path because it's involved a lot of things. It's about having imposter syndrome. It about self-worth, whatever you have invested so far, whether that will be you have to start from the ground zero. So that really tells a lot about your mindset in terms of getting into that. And just to ensure that if people do not know about the neuropsychopharmacology, I think it's a kind of a learning about how the drugs affects the brain and the nervous system overall. Is that something accurate?
that's exactly it. So it is the marriage of neuroscience and pharmacology. So yes.
Okay, that's great. So I think maybe you have taken the journey from understanding how the drug affects the brain to getting into the how the job affects the people's life.
Exactly. Yeah, you're picking up.
That's great. So let's after the check. Okay, so post this discussion, let me ask you this about because we are talking about the negotiating skills. Uh, what do you think? I mean, in terms of the salary negotiating, if you just directly get into the topic here, why people think it's so intimidating asking about a salary which they think it's worth and it's reasonable. However, they have certain other things which comes into the emotion. So help us walk through what's your experience, why it's so intimidating asking a certain salary at the time of the interviewing process.
Yeah, so I think part of it comes down to their belief. So it's a lack of belief in themselves and a lack of belief in their ability to get the desired compensation. So that's part of it. And then part of it is skill, right? Negotiation, similar to developing, right? Like writing code, it's a skill, and you can become better the more that you do it, and the more purposeful training that you focus on. So it's a mix.
Yeah. So as you mentioned about the belief and skill, uh, I think that is also some of the fine line. Maybe people, by human psychology side, on an average, people try to, I would say, mark themselves above average in terms of maybe intelligence or skills. In that perspective, there is always a possibility that in asking a certain compensation as well, either they ask too much or too little. So, in terms of when you mentioned about the belief system, what are the key ingredients comes into the picture? Like when, for example, if I'm looking for the interview and maybe the hiring professionals, they ask like, okay, what do you expect? What kind of things you should be prepared for in these kind of conversations?
Yeah. So whoever says the number first loses. So don't directly answer that question. What I recommend doing is something called reversing. So let's just say that you are interviewing me and you say, what is the salary range that you're targeting? I would immediately reverse that and I would ask you, well, what is the salary range for this role? It's important for me to have all the information up front before I do answer that question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then typically, the hiring manager will proceed in giving you what that range looks like. And right now, in 8 states, they are required to provide that information. So that is starting to become really, really common. But if they don't provide that information, then you can do what is called the double reversal. So in the double reversal, that's where you ask me, what salary range are you targeting? I reverse it back to you and you say, oh, I need to know that salary range before we move forward. And I don't know what the range is at this moment because we're still figuring that out internally, right? I can respond back and I can say, no worries. When you do have that information, just let me know via email or we can jump on a quick call. And at that time, I can let you know what that salary range looks like, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason why this is so crucial is because negotiating is like poker, right? And you don't know what the other side has, unless, of course, it's posted on the job. But if it's not posted on the job, you don't know. And what you think the role could be offering could be drastically different than what they're offering. If you're using a site like Glassdoor in order to do your research for salaries, a lot of the salary ranges are completely off, right? And so if you're utilizing that and you're like, oh, well, I think the number that I have in mind is reasonable, like you truly do not know, right? And I'll tell you firsthand, my sister, for example, she is a senior technical recruiter, and she was interviewing for a role where she was targeting 6 figures, right? Like that was her dream amount. Mm-hmm. And the company, she ended up finding out that they were willing to pay like $135 for her role, right? And had she had just said, I'm targeting $100K, she wouldn't have gotten that extra remaining amount, right? And so it's just so important to not, it's called spilling your candy, which is when you just tell the other side exactly what you're looking for, but instead, go back and forth, right? Like actually figure out what that range is and have all that data. And then from there, you can craft a really confident answer. And then in terms of the answer, I would say it really does depend on the level of a role that you're targeting. If it's manager and above, you got to be adding in a signing bonus. I mean, most manager and above, I see at least a $10K signing bonus, at least the opportunity for the person to have one. But a lot of people do not ask, right? And so it's all about how you're packaging this offer together in a really strategically wise way for you to have a mutually beneficial situation.
That's great. I think what I'm hearing you mention is just do not give a particular number or try to kind of evaluate through your discussions about what would be the range of the salary range for the role which you are trying to target. And I think you also mentioned a pretty important thing is, especially in the United States, I think a lot of states now creating a law where you have to let the candidates know what is the salary range already, right?
Yeah, it is a trend that we're seeing. So one of the things that's fascinating is that there is a difference within the law as far as being required to post the information on the job posting versus actually having to provide that information if you're asked. So there are certain states where they're not required to post that information, but they are required to tell you if you ask. But they're probably not going to tell you unless you do ask, right? So that's why it's just so key. And then one quick thing to add, I know that layoffs are happening right now, and it's pretty common. And one of the things that I recommend asking for is stating something along the lines of, given the current market conditions, I'm looking for 6 months of severance should a layoff occur, right? Because
Well,
obviously
okay.
they're
Interesting.
hiring you, okay? So they, would likely be able to comply with that. And the big thing that you're avoiding with that is, the quote, like if you're the first in, you're the first out, right? This would mitigate that risk. So that is just one of like the golden nuggets to include, especially in this labor market.
Wow, that's very interesting. You mentioned about asking about the severance beforehand. Definitely, I think that is something a good way to look at and negotiate about your salary in that terms. So let's just discuss about, as we mentioned, that what are the key things to look for when we try to, or maybe why these salaries intimidating, asking a certain salary expectations. In those anxiety, in those indecisiveness, what are some common mistakes the candidates make and how to avoid them based on your experience?
Yeah. So one of the common things I see is graspy energy. They get on the phone and you can just tell that they don't feel confident that they'll get the numbers. And then I'm not confident that they're going to get that number, right? And then with
Mhm.
tone. So I would say with tone, there's two elements of it. There's emphasis and then there's speed. So an example of emphasis would be, I didn't say she left her husband, or I didn't say she left her husband, right? I'm saying the same thing, but it's coming across very differently. And then with speed, I didn't say she left her husband. I didn't say she left her husband.
Mhm.
Whoa, same exact thing, but yeah, you're getting a totally different message. And so I really, in the program, we coach our women to focus on not just the words that they're saying it, but how they're saying it, because the tone matters a lot. And one way to easily correct the tone without the need for a lot of skill development is an increase in conviction or belief, right? When you believe with your gut that if they hire you and if they pay you whatever amount you're desiring, you are going to truly make an incredible impact. Like you could swear by it, right? If they hired anyone else who applied to that job, that other person would not deliver half the amount of value that you would deliver, right? Like if you can really honestly believe that in your gut, then you're going to come across as trustworthy and as believable, because you are so convicted in your skills and in your ability to make an impact, right? So that is really key.
So, so basically, in that case, as you mentioned, I was thinking about obviously we can ask a few things and kind of avoid mistakes. However, in certain life situations, you might have less leverage, right? For example, you are very desperate to move due to any reasons, or maybe you are laid off. In that perspective, how the negotiating skills comes into the picture with clarity of knowing that, okay, if what I've been asked, if they don't agree with that, there is a possibility that I may not get a job. But internally within somewhere, I was like, I want to get this job, but I don't want to get into too much negotiating, which discourages the hiring professional to kind of move on to another candidate, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It's all about developing a really strong or even multiple strong BATNAs. And BATNA
Mhm.
stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement, right? Let's just say that you want to get married and you get Bumble and then you go on a date with one person and you're like, look, I am so busy. I don't have much time to date many other people. So like, we're going to have to make this work. And you can just tell that like, they are so grasped. Like it just is an awkward energy. That would not work, right? And the same is true for jobs. No employer wants to hire someone who is just like desperate for the role, and you can tell that they're much more focused on them than they are actually serving. Like when you are interviewing, you got to make it about service and less about self, right? So that's so big. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by having multiple options, right? I mean, if you're job searching, my recommendation is to apply to at least 3 jobs every single day, at least. I know that sounds crazy, but I think that is a gold standard. And then we have a quote in the program that 2 rejections a day keeps the doctor away, which sounds crazy, but you need to be getting rejected quite frequently.
Yeah.
And then iterating really, really quickly. So if you're applying to a lot of places and you're applying with the same exact resume to every place, then there's no point, right? So applying to a job without tailoring your resume is like lighting money on fire. It does no good. Right. So every single job, you need to be intentional. You need to look at the keywords. There's actually a lot of Chrome extensions and tools that you can look at that will analyze the specific job postings, that will tell you exactly what keywords to include. And then what you can do is you can take your resume and then remove the things that are not necessary and then tweak it and tailor it to that specific role. And you know what? It may take you 10 minutes, 20 minutes per job. But that's actually going to save you time in the long run because you're tailoring it for that specific role, and you're more likely to get an interview and also more likely to get an offer. Because what are hiring managers doing when they're interviewing you? They're staring at your resume on one side and they're staring at you on the other side, right? So the resume is always part of the interview process, right? And so you might as well make it spectacular, right?
Yes, exactly. And which really intrigued me about, as you mentioned, that the gold standard is about applying 3 jobs per day. So I
Yeah.
think the next question would be around the same timeline, just putting a hat of a candidate who's looking for a job. So when we try to look for approximately 3 jobs per day, then there's always a scenario where some jobs are 100% as per my skill set, some are mixed 50-50, 40-60, 30-70, or 70-30, or whatever the case may be. What's
Yeah.
your advice when you do not see the jobs exactly in your skill set, because there's no 100% fit your profile and the job requirements? So how the candidates would look into and filter through these opportunities?
Great question. So statistically speaking, women apply for jobs when they meet 100% of the qualifications, and men apply when they meet 60%. It is National Women's Day,
Yes.
and it's very fitting to say that if you see a job and if you meet 55, 60% of the qualifications apply, right? It does not hurt. No one dies, right? The worst thing that can happen is you not applying and always wondering. Some would say the worst thing that would happen would be you getting rejected, but that's truly not the worst thing that would happen. The worst thing that would happen is the opportunity cost of missing out, right?
That's a great thing you mentioned about it. The worst case is about the opportunity cost, and I think if you fear or dread the fact that you will be rejected, I think that is one of the main factor where people will not try to apply. So in that perspective, if you say that, I mean, it's okay. At least I learned from something from it, and you never know how the communication uh, leads to one kind of a point of contact or the network to another. I have seen certain scenarios wherein the candidate applied and eventually they didn't land that job. However, the hiring professional mentioned that based on your skill set, I think you are more suited for the something else, which at this point we do not have any requirement. But if you are okay with that, we can consider sometime in later. And eventually, she got the job. So
Yeah.
that's a great thing you mentioned, that we have to keep hustling towards that.
Yeah,
In
and
that
that does happen, right? So in recruiting, it's called pipelining, which sounds weird, but it's where you have a pipeline of candidates who are ready to go. So when a hiring manager opens up a role, immediately you have a slew of candidates who you can immediately call up. Just pre-screen again, make sure they're ready to go, and then send them over to the hiring manager. So that's super common, and recruiters are really well trained to pipeline excellent candidates that they find, even if they don't have an open role at that time. One other note on rejection. So rejection is like the filling in the Oreo of success. So I love Oreos. At least I love Oreos that are like sugar-free and like etc. But whatever, okay. I love a version of Oreos, right? But I also recognize that if you just have the like black sandwich part, then it's not truly an Oreo. And the same is true with success. And so I think it's just about developing a love for rejection. And that may sound shocking, but it's true. When you literally can give yourself a hug after getting rejected, and you can say like, hey, look, this is like one of the steps along the journey, like we're going to do this, then that is where the gold mine is. And once again, this is not getting rejected and then doing nothing. It is getting rejected, figuring out like, oh, interesting, right? What can I be doing better in that next role, right? So you're analyzing it like a doctor would analyze a patient's diagnosis, right? You're simply noticing it, you're problem solving accordingly, and you're just not getting lost in the mind drama of it. That's really where the key is.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And this is something I love that the Oreo example you mentioned. That's that's a good perspective to put it in place. So when, as you mentioned, that people can apply 3 jobs, and then they also have to kind of accept the fact that rejection is a part of the process, and try to learn from that. The next question would be, what are the key platforms in this today's, I would say, a social revolution in terms of like having so much of social media presence? What are some of the creative ways which you have seen or you would like to share with our audience here in terms of maybe highlighting their skill set, highlighting them as a brand, and what are the platforms they can utilize to do that?
Yeah, so I recommend a passive and active job search strategy done concurrently. So what I mean by that is that you can upload your resume to the job platforms that are tailored to the types of jobs that you're applying, right? So ladders, for instance, they do primarily 6-figure jobs and above. A lot of executives get jobs through ladders, right? So that is one site. Dice, if you are within the tech space, Y Combinator has a job board for startups. AngelList has a job board for startups. Indeed is great. LinkedIn has pretty much everything on it. It's amazing. And so what you can do is, for the job boards that let you actually upload a resume and have recruiters find you, that's recommendation number 1. And then also on your LinkedIn profile, you can put open to new opportunities. And even actually, if you're employed right now, there's a way to do it where it's not visible to anyone in your company. So that is going to be really key, is making sure that if you do select it, you select it in that right way, right? And so, yeah, so I would consider those kind of the key passive strategies. And then when it comes to active, obviously, like applying yourself to the different jobs that you see, and you can set up within a number of different job platforms a email to go out to you every single day that'll have the latest jobs tailored to you that you can apply for, right? And one of the strategies that I've seen work really well is reaching out to the companies that you really want to work at, right? Like they have jobs that like they just light you up inside. You know that you would be that shining star of that company and add an immense amount of value. You can actually reach out to the CEO or the founder and have a really well-crafted, tailored message. And that is zigging where everyone else is zagging, right? That's a really innovative approach. And the big thing is that with job searching, it's really easy to become overwhelmed by all of this and to not really know I guess like the ideal ratio of everything. And so my recommendation would be, apply to 21 jobs per week, right? About 3 a day that are all super, super tailored resumes. And you want to be applying within about 48 hours of the job opening. That way you avoid being the 100th applicant, the 1,000th applicant, which does really happen, right? So once again, 21 jobs per week. And then if you do the CEO strategy, I would say about 2 to 3, reach out to about 2 or 3 CEOs per week. And that way it's just a really doable thing, right? Like the big thing is avoiding overwhelm on this, and where to take a little bit of the kind of frameworks from Atomic Habits, which is like an excellent book on it. You want to really start with something that you can keep up for potentially 2, 3, 4 months until you land that job, something that works really well with the other things going on in your life so that you do not become overwhelmed. And then when you do start actually getting those interviews, you can start to dial down your number of applications so you can actually focus on creating that interview strategy for the different roles that you're applying, preparing everything in advance, and that way you're not spending way too many hours on it, and all of this time is really intentionally designed. And I actually did create something. It's completely free. It's called Master the 7 Seconds. And I had one of my friends who worked at Microsoft, a friend who worked at Google, and a friend who worked at Airbnb. They actually donated their resumes, and we hid the names for confidentiality's sake, but you can see what their resumes look like. We explain, what worked about it. And then we also have like cover letter examples, and then the passive and active job search strategies. It's listed, it's explained in depth within this Master the 7 Seconds. And it's completely free on our website, the30kprogram.com. And if you just Google the 30K program, we're number 1 ranked SEO. So you'll find it.
That's great. That's great. So we definitely put it on the show notes as well. And definitely, I would encourage everyone to look into this 7-second you mentioned. What is that? Just say it again. The 7
Master the 7 seconds.
Master the 7 seconds. That's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll also look forward to that. So as you mentioned about getting and putting yourself out there, reaching out some of the executives. One of the interesting thing is obviously the big organizations. If you reach out to the CEOs, I think that's not possible that you will get any response because maybe they are not managing their accounts in that perspective. However, I think it depends on what kind of role you are doing as well. And maybe if it's a startup or it's a big multinational organizations where those communication can happen. So coming to the next part of it, like, okay, so I reached out, I got a couple of invitations to have some further conversations. So in that perspective, what are the key things you suggest in terms of the research? Like, how should I prepare myself before having some conversation with the hiring professionals or maybe the role specific people who would interview me?
Yeah, so research is key. So I'd go to Glassdoor, become really familiar with the types of questions that they ask per the job you're applying for, and then prepare answers in the STAR interview format. You can just Google that and it walks through exactly how to answer questions in that format. And then I would also research your interviewer. You can look them up on LinkedIn or Google them, and then look for just one thing that you have in common with them. And that way, when you do start that conversation, you can say, oh, I did a little bit of research beforehand. I noticed that we both went to KU. Go Jayhawks! Or like you're able to kind of connect with them, right? And you seem more human and less just like another applicant, right? And so that's going to be really key. And then interviewing is two-sided in the way that it's not just them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them, right? So you need to have what your clear criteria is of what type of a job you would accept, right? Like what are, from a work-life balance perspective, compensation, growth opportunities, like what are your non-negotiables, right? And so knowing that in advance so that you're not just swooned by emotions and you know your criteria going into it is going to be really, really, really key. And then also preparing interview, even just, 2 or 3 different questions that you can ask the interviewer at the end of it, that is going to be really key.
Yeah, yeah. I think you mentioned a pretty important point here to stress is it's not like they interview you. You also have the equal right, and it's totally reasonable because you're also spending your life, your time with this organization. So you have to understand what they stand for, what are their philosophies and culture, which basically resonates with your personality as well. So a very good point you made. And that also reminds me the STAR method is about situation, task,
Yeah.
action, and result. So, in case if someone is wondering how exactly a response, these are one of the some response techniques when
Yeah.
you are trying to give some answers. Think about the STAR technique, and I think that is something which you can definitely look into when you search and browse through the internet.
And it
So,
frames it in a story. I know you love stories,
yes,
so
yes,
we're tying
exactly.
back stories into it.
Stories, definitely. Stories. I love stories because one of our mentor mentioned that whatever you explain in terms of stories, you have people's attention, and that's why we have movies. They have millions of dollars of revenue. Why? They are just giving stories to you, whether they are really resonating with you or those are totally, I mean, not even related to your real life scenarios. So
Yeah.
that's why. So that's a good point of talking about the stories and having the star approach. That being said, let's try to get into a few of the last questions which I ask people. But before that, I think I would also like to provide some viewers to understand the 30K program because we haven't touched much on that. If you can just give a brief of what the 30K program is all about and how people can reach out to you.
Yeah, definitely. So the 30K program helps women to find a job that is 30K or more higher than their current yearly salary. And we do it within 48 coaching sessions. So it is a very distilled down program.
Mhm.
And within the program, we start with helping our women craft their short and their long-term career strategy. And then the second phase is actually implementing the strategy. Phase 3 is negotiation and offer letters. And then stage 4 is growing as a leader. What we've noticed is that if we do not do leadership development within the program, then the women start their new job and then they feel like an imposter because they're getting paid more. They may have a newer, sexier title, and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so out of my element. I'm so unqualified, right? And so we really
Yes.
have to work with them and their belief in themselves and in their skills. And so that is why leadership development is really at the crux for having this be a longer term win. And the 30K, when you look at it, the average career is 43 years in the United States, and $30,000 times 43 is 1.29 million. So if a woman joins us in the very beginning of her career, it's a really substantial increase in comp, and that's excluding if she were to invest that income into the stock market, and it's also excluding the raise increases, because raises typically in the United States are between 2 and 5%, and they're based off of your salary. So if the base salary is higher, you would actually be getting higher raises as well throughout your entire career. So there's a lot of thought that went
A
into
lot
this.
of stuff. Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, all the women out there who are listening, please, if you are really looking forward to have some perspective and trying and make an efforts to raise your salary based on what you really worth, please reach out to me and her firm to get more information. So, quickly get into the last two questions which I ask all my guests. The first question is, how do you describe leadership in one word?
Service.
Service. Great. That's a wonderful thing. Yeah, leadership is about serving others, and or what we say servant leadership as well in certain
Yeah.
way. So absolutely, that's great. Uh, the second question is, what is that one advice you got from your mentor, which really transformed your life and the way you look into anything in your life, in maybe in the past, present, or maybe in the future as well.
Discomfort is the currency of your dreams.
Great. Discomfort is the
Currency of your dreams.
currency.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. So that's great. Again, I'll try to repeat so that I'll also remember. Discomfort is the currency of the
Of your
world
dreams.
of your dreams.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Discomfort is the currency of your dreams. That's great. Actually, that's the first time I heard, and I love it. So that's great, Mia. It was fun talking to you, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors, for your firm, the 30K program, and everything what you're doing for women to empower them. And specifically today, it's International Women's Day. So I will congratulate all the women in my life, in your life, and whatever they are making a world a better place. So all power to the women as well.
Woohoo! Fantastic. Thank you so much.